fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We've got Mr. Smoker Joe here, still waiting to smoke.
It's a beautiful weather. It's beautiful weather. I was actually on YouTube yesterday, reminding myself how to do it. It's been so long, so I'm ready. I'm ready to crank on the pellets.
Yeah,
eat some meat I shouldn't be eating because that's got my LDL scores back, and it's just a little high.
Yeah, stop it.
I know.
Yeah. You got
so hard skinned. No, don't ever go to the doctor. My dad was a doctor. He said, don't go to the doctor. Yeah. You go to the doctor, they want another test. They want to do this. Oh, we can do that for you. All right, great.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I love tests. Anyway,
yeah, I know. You're falling apart, so
yeah.
It's okay.
Well, yeah, it's just a mess. So, well, now speaking of
falling
apart,
yeah.
Smoke show, smoking. Anyway, we've got an author returning, and he's got a new book, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, and it is Philip Fracassi. So thank you for being here, Phil.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Glad to be here again.
Oh, yeah. So how have you been? It's been a few years. So what's been going on with you? It seems like you've always got stuff going on.
Yeah, I think in this industry, you have to kind of stay busy, and you need to have a lot of irons in the fire because you're never really sure what's gonna work out and what's not. So in publishing and I dabble in the film side with stuff too. So I'm always I just try and stay busy and work hard and then hope that, every now and then I catch a break. So I feel very fortunate, over the last, couple of years. I've had some books come out, and I think I have, including Autumn Springs, 5 books coming out in the next 2+ years. So that are already sold and slated. So that's a really good feeling. And yeah, it's got some movie stuff happening with some of my books. So it's been good. I got no complaints, but I just try and keep moving forward like a shark, never want to stop.
Yeah. You do it while you can. Why not? Go for it. So what's going on in the horror world, as far as you're concerned? Is it a good, vibrant sort of thing, and everything's going good and moving along?
I think the horror world is really healthy right now. I think there is, generally speaking, the publishing world is, strained. Obviously people, generally speaking, are reading less. But there's a lot of other avenues that are picking up, with audiobooks and ebooks. And I think people are finding ways to absorb, the stories that are coming out. But I think horror is really healthy. I think, with a lot of one of the things that this year that's been great has been the original horror films that have come out that are doing big business, with original stories, like Sinners, for example, or Weapons. And I think, that's kind of one of those, tide rising, raising all boats sort of thing, because I think there's a bit more of a fever for new, fresh, original horror stories, both in, the film world and in the fiction world. And yeah, I definitely feel like there's a lot of demand. I mean, I'm always behind the 8 ball trying to, writing, trying to keep up, and get new stuff out there, new stories out there. And, yeah, I think it's really healthy right now. I think horror's in really good shape and continuing to grow. Yeah.
Well, what do you think that is? Like, it comes and it goes, like there's different, genres. And is there a reason why you think horror all of a sudden hits off, and there's a lot of good writers out there, a lot of good film, television, everything's booming, and then it falls apart? Is there something going on in society, or is it just, what do you ever think about that sort of thing?
Whenever that comes up, the ebbs and flows, I always think personally, it always feels to me to be generational. It has to, more to do with, I think, I always think about the big boom of horror in the 80s and with King and Koontz and Clive Barker and Peter Straub, and that big, when Stephen King came on the scene, it was like shook the world. And I think my generation, when we were teenagers then, and now we're all in our 40s and 50s, and I think are producing more content and producing more stories. And I think a lot of that stuff is beginning to filter through into Hollywood and into publishing. And And I think the same with readers. You know, readers are wanting to consume new material. I think that, and you know, generational aside, I think just from a societal point of view, yeah, you got. I think when things are, dark, from a societal perspective, I think people do tend to turn toward dark material, and they like to be able to watch a slasher movie and survive. And I think there's like this kind of like feeling of, okay, see, we can get through this. Like, look, I'm still alive, and I just watched this horrible story about all these people being killed by a masked murderer. But, and then I also think there's, from an entertainment perspective, I think people are just kind of tired of the same old. I mean, no offense to Marvel, but like how many superhero movies can you actually, can you see, and how many sequels can you shove down people's throats before they start wanting something new? And I think that's a big, how many reboots, etc. I just feel like, I think like in the, from 2000, 1990, mid 1990s to mid 2000s, I think there was so much content that was just retread. And I think that now that there's a real, like I said earlier, there's kind of a fever for new stories and fresh stories. And I think that's what's going on. I mean, that's my layman, uneducated opinion, but I do feel that that's part of why things are trending that way.
Hey, Philip, this is Joe. You said some key words there, so I want to ask a question for somebody who's not necessarily a horror genre expert. You use words like new readers, new markets, generational shift. If you're a new reader, a new generation, generation Bezeta, whatever they call them now, where do they start for reading? Not for the movies are easy. Where do they start for books, for reading? Where if you want to get into it, obviously there's King and Kuntz. You mentioned the old guys, but it's new stories. Is there someplace they should start?
Well, that's another part of it, and it's a good question, because that's another part of it. I think that publishers are really laser focused on, and to your 2 point, and I hate to just overuse the word or term, but new voices. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot more diversity. I think the younger generation who's coming up right now wants that kind of diverse palette of voices, and different, they just don't, people are kind of, I think, steering away from traditional horror, in the sense of like, there's a lot of like older white male horror writers, and I think, including myself. So I think there's a lot of desire to see different types of stories from different types of people, people with different backgrounds or different ethnicities or different sexual orientation or whatever you want to do. And I think there's a real thirst for those stories, and publishers are facilitating that. Publishers are definitely focusing on, those diverse voices. So I think that is that's not answering your question, but it kind of gives you the framework for what I think the younger readers are looking for and finding and discovering. I think there's writers like, Eric LaRocca, Haley Piper, Rachel Harrison, I think is a great gateway, for people who are maybe not, not into that, deep horror or deep dive horror, we'll call it, but maybe more mainstream horror. I think you got guys like Riley Sager, who's a thriller writer, but also dabbles in the supernatural. So I would say, like, there's so many, Paul Tremblay, Josh Mallerman, these guys have created, Judge Grady Hendrix, Stephen Graham Jones, Tanana Reeve Dew. All these authors are creating, new stories that are fresh, that have a different perspective. And they're, a lot of these guys are now hitting, this isn't just like a genre thing. You're talking about New York Times bestsellers numbers. Paul Tremblay hit the New York Times bestseller list. Richard Chismar hit the New York Times bestseller list. Stephen Graham Jones, Tanana Reeve Dew, Josh Mallerman. These guys are, Rachel Harrison's a bestseller. So I think there's a lot of, I think we're kind of, horror has sort of found its way into the mainstream. And I think the way that's happened is because there are writers who are sort of walking that line of, we're going to, it's not zombies and vampires and serial killers, although my new book that we're talking about is a serial killer. But,
yeah, come on.
So it's a great thing.
Back up there, white guy.
But I think it's not that. I think when people hear horror, at least traditionally, they think of those things. They think of them, what they know from the movies. They think of the tropes. They think of the zombies and and Jason, slashing up teenagers at summer camps. And I think horror has become so much more now. It is there's the stories and the writing is so broad that there's kind of something for everybody. And, I think tying it into what my book is, what I've heard a lot of feedback from librarians and booksellers and readers for my book is that it's kind of also, they see it as sort of like this gateway drug to people who maybe more are just maybe like a good mystery or like a good whodunit or a good thriller, but also it feeds into that horror vein too. I mean, there's definitely some dark stuff in the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. Similarly, I wrote a book, that published earlier this year, from Hachette called The Third Rule of Time Travel, which was science fiction, but also had some horror in it. And I think other writers are kind of doing similar things to what I'm doing, which is taking kind of classic tropes or classic ideas of what horror is, but kind of reshaping it for a more, broader audience. And I think that has kind of like raised the genre as a whole.
So let's talk about the new book and the premise of it. What's the basic storyline here?
The easy description is it's about a serial killer in a retirement home. And it's a slasher set in a retirement home. So,
so do you not like old people?
Right?
I mean, it's one of those things where, I just had this kind of idea of wanting to write a horror story in a retirement home. And it's kind of, this year in particular, for whatever reason, there seemed to be, there's several books and movies coming out that take place in a similar kind of environment. And I just kind of had this thought of for me, it was less about, I want to make a Friday the 13th movie in a retirement home. It's less about the slasher element and more about what I kept coming back to when I was germinating this idea was, how would these residents react or respond to the idea that their friends and neighbors are being slaughtered by a serial killer? Like, how does someone who is in their 80s and supposedly, living out their sunset years and in peace and harmony and trying to like enjoy their time and in this kind of sheltered community of like-minded peers, and suddenly there's like this grenade that drops. And I kind of thought that was really fascinating to me. And it was more, like I said, it was really more just about the slasher element is really tertiary to the characters and how they respond and how they respond to each other. Is there paranoia? Because one of the things I address, one of the themes in the book is death. And there's a certain comfort level that the residents of Autumn Springs have with death. There's a certain kinship where they kind of know it's coming and they know and they want to really maximize the time they have. And it's not something necessarily scary. It's more kind of something that they're just know is there and it's in the next room, or it's maybe, hiding in the corner or under the table when you're eating breakfast or whatever it is, but it's there, it's around. And I think then, and kind of coming to terms with that as someone who's in a retirement community and, in their 80s or whatever. And then having this sort of like monster dropped into the house and, I just thought that for me, it was really fascinating to explore what that would look like and how these characters would respond to that. And so that's really thematically what the book is really about. It's really about the elderly, how they're perceived, which is something I try to blow up about the perception of elderly people, especially in this country, and about how they perceive their lives, and then how do they respond to this killer running around among them, and when like nobody's taking them seriously, or maybe the police aren't necessarily paying that much attention, because after all, it is a retirement home, people die. So yes, for all these reasons, I thought it created a really interesting dynamic from a character perspective that I wanted to explore, and that's something I get really deep into in the book.
Well, Philip, let's stick with characters then. How did you develop the characters inside your retirement home? How did you create them? What was their motivation? What was anything about them?
Yeah, I mean, I pulled a lot from my personal life. I'm in my 50s. My parents, over the course of the year I was writing this book, both of my parents passed away, and my father suffered from dementia at the end. And I had to, I was basically his caretaker for a couple months, kind of a home hospice situation where I had to move in with them for a little bit. And then shortly after my mother passed. And a lot of the conversations I had with both of my parents during that time really opened my eyes to a lot of the thought processes that I think people go through at that stage of their lives, and how will my children, be impacted by my passing, and who will take care of me if I can't take care of myself, and there's a lot of fear, but there's also a lot of like desire, and is almost like thinking about others as well, and how that impacts the families, and how it impacts all these things. So a lot of that made it into the book, and became kind of rounded out some of the secondary characters in the book. And, also I've spent time in retirement communities, both as a teenager, kind of doing service, through a church where I was spending a lot of time with retirees. And then also like when I was in movies, I was working in locations, and I spent like a month at a retirement community here in Los Angeles, for a TV show called Yellow Jackets that I worked on. And then my in-laws over the last few years, I've been moving into a retirement community. So we had a lot of discussions with them about what they were looking for and how their lives would change. And so there's a lot of input that made it into this book and made it into these characters. But to be honest, Rose DuBois, who is the main protagonist of the story, kind of arrived to me fully formed. She was just there. And I could see all her complexities. I could see all of her dark secrets, her background, her fears, her desires, her need for independence, knowing that independence was probably fleeting, her family, how her life was being impacted by her family and vice versa. And so I really slipped into her mind very, very easily. And writing her was one of the best experiences I've ever had as a writer, because I never had to question how she would respond to something. And it was just so smooth for me. And the secondary protagonist is a gentleman named Miller, who's her friend. And he has sort of an Ossie Davis kind of vibe. He's kind of like this tall, lanky, mellow, chill dude, but he's got secrets too. And he wants more from his relationship with Rose. And so they have this kind of will they or won't they almost kind of deal going. And so the characters for me, I don't have a lot of talents. I can't play a musical instrument. I can't learn foreign language. I'm geographically inept, but I am really good at kind of creating characters in my head and kind of like going, living with them and watching what they do and writing it down, So, but all that stuff came into play when I was coming up with the characters who make up the story. And there's a lot of them. There's 80 residents at Autumn Springs Retirement Community. And, much like my novel Boys in the Valley, there was 30 boys between the ages of 6 and 16. So that was another situation where I had to come up with a lot of diverse personalities in order to flesh out this story. And with this one, there was like I said, there's 80, and half of them, have screen time, if you will, or page time, if you will, in the book. And so there's a lot of different voices and a lot of different personalities. But I really didn't want this to become a thing where, when you watch those TV shows like Lost, and there's always like the 5 guys who do everything, and then there's always the extras in the background walking around the island, like, I don't know, digging holes or cook, whatever they're doing, and you never meet them. They're always like, back there. And it was very important to me that this felt like a community. It didn't feel like 5 people doing something and then the rest of the people are all just like extras. And I really wanted to get a lot of the characters screen time and page time, and I wanted to give them unique personalities. So there's a lot going on at Autumn Springs. There's these 3 sisters who are kind of like into witchcraft, and there's this other guy who's kind of, this Russian guy who's sort of like really into chess and has a heart problem, and there's a guy who is suffering from dementia but has a really good heart, and so there's a lot of different people that populate this community. So that was a lot of fun for me, was coming up with all these people, all these characters, and then like kind of throwing them all into this hot box of horror and seeing what would happen.
So when you talk about doing, the group thought, like as in how the group reacts, you got this group of old people in a home and killers amongst them. And that, so did you assemble all of these characters, these 80 characters, Rose and and the Russian and all that stuff. Did you kind of really feel all of them out and get them written and thought about before the situation and before putting them into that situation so that they react as a group that way from their individuals? Or did you have the group thought of how they were going to react and behave in your mind first?
I'll say this, and this is, kind of plays in exact to what you're asking. You know, I'm a big outliner, generally speaking, with my novels or screenplays. I really like to know where I'm going before I start actually writing. I like to know chapter by chapter what's going to happen, how does it end, who's the killer, all this stuff. I want to know all that when I start a book. And this is the first time I've ever written a book where I did not do that. And which was not by choice. It just, for whatever reason, I had like this mental block where I could not outline this book. And I knew I just had to kind of like go. I just had to like start. And I had Rose and I had Miller, and that's kind of all I had. I had a couple scenes in my head, that I knew I wanted to have in the book, but I didn't really know who they were going to happen to or when they were going to happen. So it kind of happened, or everything kind of grew organically. The characters kind of started showing up. And as I wrote, like I think in the first chapter, it's Rose and Miller kind of having like this, scene. And then I found this friend of Rose's, and so they had a conversation, and then something happens to the friend, and then I realize she has a boyfriend, and then there's, and then there's, and it kind of, and then. And so everything kind of, sprang from this acorn of these two main characters, as I wrote the book. And so to answer your question, it was really, everyone was kind of reacting real time, and the characters were being formed real time as I was writing, which, like I said, is not the way I prefer to do things. It's just the way it happened. But this was an interesting process for me because I've never written a novel this way, especially when you're talking about a whodunit mystery. There are red herrings, there's misdirection, there's, and there's so many characters, and they all, I have like maps of like where they all live, within the community, and trying to keep my blocking right, as it were, and, so it was really interesting, and it was a lot of fun. It ended up causing me to do more rewriting than I normally do. Usually my first drafts are pretty close to what ends up in the final product. This was a situation where I had to do a couple pretty serious rewrites because I wanted to make sure that everything made sense and that everything worked, and all the characters had, were drawn the right way. So yeah, this was everything kind of happened as I was writing it, which is not, like I said, not usually. I have like a list of characters, what every chapter is outlined. This is what happens in this chapter. These are characters, this guy dies, this guy, saves somebody, whatever it is. And yeah, but this one, it was all organic.
Hey, Philip, did you change the way you handle violence inside a retirement center?
No, I purposely leaned into it because I didn't want to treat these characters any differently than I would have treated anybody else in one of my horror stories. And I wanted to give them the respect of being killed in the most gruesome,
let me write that one down,
in the most gruesome, horrific way possible, with as much detailed explanation as I could offer. So no, I lean into it. I'll be honest, I lean into it. There are some, look, this book has some moments of, this is a very, this is the kind of book that will emotionally run the gamut. There will be moments where you will be emotionally upset. There are moments where you will hopefully laugh. There are moments where you will hopefully be, if not scared, at least anxious, hopefully scared, but it's hard to scare people in fiction. And so the darker moments, there are some dark, I don't think dark comedy is the right word, but there are some moments that I play on some tropes. Like there are, there is I don't want to spoil anything for readers, but there is like dentures are involved in, medication is heavily involved. Things like, walkers. And so I lean into some of the obvious, gags, if you will, that you can do. There's even one scene where I toy with the idea of, the heart, not the heart, the alert button that you wear around your neck. I'm falling and I can't get up. Alert button, that comes into play. So I lean into that stuff. And because I I wanted this book to be fun and violent and scary, but really I wanted the characters to be fully fleshed out and have a respect for these characters. And that really is what it comes down to. But no, I did not pull back. And it's been interesting reading some of the early reviews of the book because there are people who are approaching this from a horror perspective because they've read my other horror novels and are like, it's a little light on the violence, but it's still a great whodunit, kind of mystery. And then there's these people who are coming at it from like, who read the Richard Osman Thursday Murder Club books and are like, what the hell was going on? Like, this is the most disturbing. I have nightmares, that kind of stuff, but I loved it, So, thankfully a lot of it's been positive, but you can definitely tell who's coming at it from which perspective. So I think it kind of ends up meeting in the middle a little bit. I think I wouldn't qualify it as cozy. There's definitely some blood and gore but I think if you're like a horror nut, it's probably pretty mild on that front because it's really more about the mystery and the drama of the characters. But there's a serial killer and people are dying. I mean, the title is The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, and I try to make sure that I fulfill the promise of the title for sure.
So when you're writing this, is there a point of view you write from, or is it one character or several, or how do you do that?
So in this book, Rose is my primary protagonist. So most of the book is told from her perspective, but I do, have chapters that are told from alternate perspective. And a lot of that decision making is done. Well, that's usually something that I decide while writing. I try and make sure I'm only in one head at a time. But most of it's told from Rose, but the detective has a couple chapters, and some of her friends have, some of the other characters have their own, chapters. And I think also, when the killer, the death scenes are pretty much told from the perspective of the victim. So in order to really, create as much visceral impact as I can for the reader. So I bounce around a lot, and I think, but primarily it's Rose, and with, mentioning Boys in the Valley, that's, like I said, there were 30 characters in that, and that was basically, that whole book was told from 5 perspectives. And this whole book, I think there's probably more than that, because I do dance around with some different folks, but that decision is made really, as I go, because you don't want to necessarily have too many perspectives. I don't know. I think it kind of like dilutes some of what, like, the reader's connection with the book. But you want to have enough where you can create different feelings with different scenes. And also you want to, especially with this book, you want to be able to prolong the mystery as long as you can. So you want to limit the POVs so that you're not giving stuff away. Because if I offer a POV of someone and then they're here and the killer's over there, 5 minutes later, they're not the killer. And what fun is that? So that was all went into the decision making of the perspectives that I write from. Is I was very careful not to ever give anything away. And my editor at Tor was actually really helpful with that. We ended up modifying some stuff because she felt like this was a little bit too much of a giveaway, or this is a little bit too much information. So we definitely focused on that from the writing process all the way through the editing process. You
built the book without the outline. You had the idea. And I'm just wondering, as you were writing, did some greater themes come out? You've pushed the respect the elderly theme. Was that something you planned on going in, or did that just happen, or were there other ones? Were there bigger themes than just a massacre in a retirement center? Yeah,
so good question, because yes, the answer is yes. There were some definite thematic swings, and when I pitched the book to my editor, I kind of pitched it as a dark comedy. And a lot of the chapters, I was kind of like throwing scenes at her that I thought of, like this scene and this, little moments that I had already kind of like started developing in my head. And when I was thinking about those scenes, I was thinking that they would be kind of like funny in a way, like not laugh out loud funny, but kind of like amusing. And they ended up being some of the darker, chapters of the book, and I mean by dark is like where people have, reviewers and readers have been like, dude, like I wept during this chapter, which was a chapter that I thought would be hilarious. but yeah. So what happened was when I started writing the book, and like I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of personal stuff going on with my parents and everything. And I think I just kind of realized as I was getting to know these characters, I think because it was written somewhat organically, like I said, I think I kind of realized as I got deeper into these characters and deeper into this community, I started really caring. I always care about my characters, but I started really caring deeply about some of these characters. And I really wanted to know more about them. I wanted to know more about, what was going on with them and what their thoughts and desires and what their histories were. And it just kind of made me more sentimental, I guess, toward a lot of the characters. And it made me want to talk more about how the elderly are perceived and also how they perceive themselves, like I mentioned at the head of the chat. And so all that stuff kind of just developed organically, but I would 100%, it became much more about growing old, dying, the complications, the fears, but not just, but just like the desires, the dreams of someone who's in their 80s, and what do they want? What are their motivations? And so all that stuff really became important to me, and I loved the complexity of it, and I loved how deep it got. And Rose became very complex and deep, and she's got a very sordid history that you find out about throughout the book, and she kind of has her own arc within the story. And so, yeah, no, it definitely changed as I get into the book. I think it was probably because of a lot of what was going on with me personally. I also think it was a lot because as I got more into immersed in that world and more immersed into those characters, I think I just my curiosity took over, and I kind of wanted to write more about a little more deeper into the psychological aspects of what was happening, and not just like a surface slasher, with dark comedic elements, which is kind of how I originally thought of it. But so that all changed during the writing process, where I definitely switched gears and went a little deeper than I had intended.
So when you're telling it from these points of views and this whole storyline, do you keep suspense in there? Does the reader know what's happening and who the killer is and all that, or do you have secrets from the reader?
No, the killer. No, it's a whodunit. It's definitely a whodunit in the sense that the killer is a mystery until the very end. So it's a reveal, and there are a lot of suspects. So no, there is definitely, like I said, part of what I went through with the editing process was really making sure I wasn't giving too much information to the reader, but enough information that the reader could, it's just like with any great mystery or thriller that you've seen, you want to kind of you want to be intrigued, and you want to have your guesses, and you want to speculate who's doing what. And so that was a big part of it. And I thought that was part of the entertainment value of the book, is that it is a whodunit. It's, unlike, maybe, I think a lot of slashers have that kind of reveal at the end, or it's, but for me, it was really, the mystery of who it was, because it impacted the relationships with the characters too, between the characters, because there's a lot of paranoia, and there's some weird stuff going on, generally speaking, with some of the residents of Autumn Springs, that, there's a little supernatural element, that's going on. And so you're kind of always wondering what exactly is happening here. And, it's not like necessarily a straightforward slasher. There's a lot of, I don't know if misdirection is the right word, but there's a lot of things that are going on that could lead you to believe that maybe, as a reader, maybe you're not 100% sure. All you know is that people are dying in horrific ways. And you know that there's this core group of friends who are trying to figure out what's happening, and you kind of follow them along this journey. It's definitely a situation where I was holding back information until the last possible moment. And honestly, I didn't know who the killer was going to be for sure until I wrote that scene near the end of the book. I had my ideas. I had some thoughts, and I was kind of waiting to see how it all play out. And even the end of the book, the last chapter of the book wasn't supposed to be the last chapter. I had, when I was writing it, I was like, I'm going to write this and I'm going to write this. And, but then when I wrote that second to last chapter, I just kind of knew that was it. That was the way the book was going to end. The story was going to end. So, but I definitely play up the whodunit element of it, and hopefully that is something that carries through. I've heard, early reviews have been somewhat mixed. A couple of people have declare they knew who the killer was the whole time, which will happen. But most people that I've read, or most reviewers of the early reviews I've read, have been like that they were definitely surprised. So that was a really fun for me. Very hard to do when you don't outline. But I did the best I could with it.
Well, listen, so what's next, too? You got this coming out, of course, on the 30th, I believe.
Yeah.
What else you got? You said you got a lot of other stuff going on. What can we expect?
Yeah, so I have, Autumn Springs comes out September 30th. Next April, I have a new novel coming out called Serafina, which is historical horror novel about 3 brothers in the Civil War who go AWOL, and they fight for the Confederate Army, and they go AWOL, and they have to get from Shiloh, Tennessee to Natchez, Mississippi without being caught by the Home Guard or killed by wild animals or bandits or starving in the wilderness. So, but then they find this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and horror ensues. So that's called Serafina. That comes out in April of 2026. And then I have a new story collection coming out at the end of next year called Traps and Specters. And then I have, I'm writing a sequel to my novel Gothic that's been sold for 2027. And then I have another mystery thriller, that's been written and that has sold, for end of 2027. It hasn't been announced yet, but it has been sold. So good stuff coming out, some good novels coming out. And right now I'm working on the Gothic sequel, and then I'm going to write another horror novel that I have lined up, ready to go. So there's some books definitely coming out for the next. I think I'm slated through 2027 right now, which is nice because it gives me a little breathing room to write the next one. Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I don't know what you do for a good time when you're off, like not writing. I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean?
Yeah, serial killer. He's the one.
Yeah. No,
kills.
I live, for better or for worse, I work, I'm at my desk 6-7 days a week, 10 hours a day. And it's what I love to do. If I'm not writing, I'm reading and try to take the occasional trip so my wife doesn't leave me. And then a couple, and I've also got, there's a movie called Alter, A24, the studio A24, made that movie, which is based on one of my short stories. That's coming out next summer. It's already been filmed. And I just announced a movie, based on my short story, Failsafe. That's J.J. Abrams, A Bad Robot, is producing. Brie Larson is starring in it. She's Captain Marvel, or, the actress from Captain Marvel. So she's going to be starring in that, and hopefully that gets into production pretty soon. So I've been a few other things kind of in development. So yeah, but the movie Alter will hopefully come out next summer. It's supposed to come out this summer, but they ended up doing some reshoots and they're still working on it. So next summer now. Well, listen, so are you doing book shows, any events? Do you have social media, a website? Where do people find you? Man, I'm everywhere. I have to be. You have to be these days. You have to be. They don't let you not be. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X, unfortunately. And my website is pfracassi.com. And yeah, I'm actually doing a big tour, basically on the road the whole month of October and some of November. I'll be going across the country, and all that information you can find on my Facebook page or Instagram or my website, pfracassi.com. But I think I'm doing like 20 stops, hitting some festivals and stores, and I'll be in New York, and I'll be in San Diego, and I'll be in Salt Lake, and I'll be in New Orleans, and Albuquerque, and Pennsylvania, and Boston, and everything. So it's gonna be a nice, fun tour. A couple of stores I'm sure you guys are familiar with, like Poison Pen and Mysterious Galaxy, kind of the usual horror, Murder by the Book in Houston. So I'm excited about hitting the road and meeting some readers and going to a couple of these festivals and stuff like that. It's always fun to meet fans and sign books, and that's the kind of reward for the sitting in the office by yourself, for 6 months writing something, is you actually get to leave and meet people who enjoyed it. That's always fun. Yeah, it's great. It's good. Well, everyone, pick up the book, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. And it's Philip Fracassi. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Alan, and thank you, Joe.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.